Hello and welcome to another Broken Binding interview. Today I'm talking to Gourav Mohanty. He's the author of Sons of Darkness and Dance of Shadows, and of course the Broken Binding special editions. Look at that, gorgeous sprayed editions. These are both available now from the Broken Binding special edition website. There'll be a link down below. Check them out. Gaurav, thank you for making some time for us to talk to us today. It's been nice to see you again because last time was at Glasgow last year.
Yeah, and welcome. And thank you so much for having me. And I love how we were in sync when we showed the books. It felt like we had pre-choreographed this, but trust me, guys, we hadn't. This
Not
was some
planned.
cosmic connection across borders.
This is it.
But
Across vast time zones and time and space. So let's get back to the beginning. How old were you when you were introduced to fantasy fiction, science fiction, or speculative fiction, as it used to be called back in the 60s and 70s?
I think it's still called spec fic by people in India who are trying not to get caught up in the fantasy genre because, as I have spoken in multiple interviews, in India, fantasy as a genre is not looked down upon, rather looked as children literature rather than something which is adult fantasy. It's still trying to come up here. So authors who write or deal with magical realism often use the genre speculative fiction rather than fantasy. But I'm sure we'll get there at some point of time in the interview. But my origin story. It's a cliche, and I think we have shared the story on Worldcon because of all the drama that happened there with George R.R. Martin. But my story started with a Game of Thrones. I remember we didn't have HBO in India then in terms of watching these shows, so we used to download them illegally on torrent sites. And my train from my law school back to my home was a 36-hour train journey.
Wow.
And so Game of Thrones had just released. It had not become the big phenomena it was. And only one season had come out. And I downloaded it without realizing what this show is about. And I remember I watched the first episode and I'm in the train and I'm sleeping. And it's not a seat, it's a sleeper train. And I remember I did not sleep throughout the night. And at the end, in the ninth episode, when Ned Stark dies, I woke up with such a start that my head hit the ceiling of the train. This is a true story, okay? And the season gets over, and I realize that, oh, wait, where is the next season? And I realize it's going to come out next year, but there are books based on the series. So then I started foraying. I always used to read, but I never read fantasy per se.
Yeah.
So A Game of Thrones became the first fantasy book I ever read, and it was a great book to start this out with. And over the next year, I completed all the books, and I was so thrilled to read something which is so immersive in its nature and the different shades of characters it dealt with. So I wanted to read something similar in India, but that's something I couldn't find. And ultimately, I started reading Lies of Locke Lamora, Malazan. My Google search around that point used to be books like A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, you've got some big meaty series to go through for sure.
Yeah. I'm just like really honored and like I can't believe it that now in those lists, even Sons of Darkness features in the sixth or seventh rank. And I think that's like manifestation come true. So
Yeah, you've come full circle. So what was it about Game of Thrones in particular that kind of sparked your interest? Was it just that well, you tell me, what was it?
so the kind of books that I've read in terms of a medieval situation or historical fiction, I've always read them as black and white characters.
Right.
The morality has always been very clearly defined. And personally, I've always had an issue with it, thinking that that's not how it works because history is often written by the victors. If it was
Yes.
written from the perspective of the vanquished, then the story might be very different. And a Game of Thrones introduced me to that because one, you have a lot of heroes to choose from. I always love PS4 games where I can choose through multiple characters. Who do I want to like play as? I love those
Right.
kind of situations. So I think a Game of Thrones gave me that option when it came to a book. I didn't have to choose a single protagonist. There were so many anti-heroes and heroines to
Mm.
choose from. So that availability of option was very attractive to me. And then I discovered this term a little later on in my writing career. It's called multiple POV. I did not know it then. I was a noob. And I was just like, this is amazing. The number of heads you can get through. So I think that was the biggest draw for me, at least to Game of Thrones, that the multiple mindsets that you can get through, and you can choose your favorites. It doesn't have to be this one person. And rather than black and white, there are 50 shades of gray.
Yes, although that book is not an influence for me. I'll just say that up front. I don't know about you. That's fine. That's fine.
I haven't read that book either, but all I meant was like 50 Shades of Grey personality, not Christian Grey. Yeah. for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. So after you'd read Game of Thrones and then you started consuming all these other series, were they kind of feeding into your creative ideas? Like, did you read all of Malazan? Have you gone through the whole of it? Because I haven't
No,
finished it yet.
I'm at Tall the Hounds because
Right.
Malazan is a heavy book. So once I think I read one book per 7 or 8 months. That's generally it takes me 7 or 6 months to read it, and then there's like a big gap,
Yeah.
and I go through other books, and then I go back into the Malazan world. Um, I've read, yeah, I think once I started reading a Game of Thrones and started reading, I read Gardens of the Moon first, and that's
Yep.
a very difficult book to get into at the start if you're not acquainted with fantasy. And that
Oh
was
yeah.
just my second book, right? And I couldn't understand what is this Warren system? What is happening? Why is Tattersail doing this? Luckily, Anomander Rake, I don't know if you've read Malazan, but the Son of Darkness, who's called the Son of Darkness in that series, there was this very cool swordsman. He kept me hooked till the point
Right.
where suddenly the series starts making sense. The book starts making sense.
Hmm.
And from there, I read Lies of Locke Lamora, which is so good. So funny,
I
so
still think
witty.
it's my favorite Scott Lynch that he's done. I like the other ones. I do enjoy Red Seas and the ones after that, but there's just something about it. It's the mix of the Oliver Twist kind of poor little orphan boy, and then the mix of the heists and the characters and their friendships and all that mixed together. It just works so beautifully.
Absolutely. And just not because there are certain scenes which do not really have a point in the larger plot structure as a whole,
Mm,
but they just make so much sense because of the dialogues that are used, which describe the relation between Locke and John.
yeah.
And that friendship which exists, and especially the use of wit in the situation. It's dry British humor, which I really, really enjoy. Something which I've loved ever since I used to read Woodhouse. And I think I got that flavor from Lies of Locke Lamora as well.
Yeah.
So from there on started my twist because then I read Sanderson, then I think I read Anthony Ryan's novels as well. The first one, Blood
Blood
Raven.
Song.
Yeah. Blood Songs,
Blood
yes.
Song. Yes.
Blood Song,
Yes.
yes. So all of these books were something which I was getting acquainted with, and I just realized that fantasy as a genre is as wide as the medical field. Like there are so many subgenres there which can be genres in themselves. And it was amazing. It was just a world to like get lost into. So yeah,
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
been doing that ever since.
Fantastic. So obviously I live in the UK and you live in India. A friend of mine, Sadir Samir, lives in Sweden, and he's basically said that fantasy isn't a thing there. It's just like no one reads it. And if you try and sell fantasy books from UK or America to Sweden, they're just not they're just not into it at all. So in terms of fantasy writers in India, is there a burgeoning community? Are there groups that you were able to join? Are there friends that you could talk to about, I'm working on this story and they've got their own story? Or is it just, it doesn't happen?
No, for me personally, it was an absolutely lonely journey. There
Right.
was no groups that I joined, and there was no
Oh,
one to talk in India to. None of my friends read fantasy, and I had not discovered the charms of Reddit yet. Our fantasy was something which I discovered very late. I wish I discovered it then so that I could have found kindred souls. But around that point of time, I did not even know that maybe I thought my research is poor in this regard. Maybe I do not know enough. But
right.
once I started querying, for my book, Sons of Darkness, when it was over, that is when I realized that the market situation of fantasy in India, like while I believe that India is the cradle, or at least South Asia is the cradle of the fantasy genre because of the magical stories that we have always had. But and mythology is also something which is very close to us because unlike a lot of other civilizations like Greek or Aztec or the Norse, those gods who were worshipped in our Indian mythology are still worshipped. We are very unique in that situation because that
Yeah.
religion still goes on. It's very strong right now. In fact, one of the characters in Sons of Darkness is a god my mother worships. Right. So it's a little difficult for me sometimes to keep that in mind, while I'm making him do very grim dark actions. So it's interesting that way. But when I started researching here, I realized that um, how in books which we read, a simple toss of coin can change your destiny, your direction in which your life can take, right?
Yeah.
I think the same thing happened with Greek and Indian mythology. What happened with Greek is they shared a common language with the English, with the
Mhm.
Britishers. So when your guys came in towards the Greek side, they looked at Odyssey and they looked at Homer's Iliad and
Mhm.
thought of them as classics and made them compulsory reading material in Oxford and Eton and everywhere else. They were translated and, read across Europe. When they came to India, Sanskrit was not something which they understood. And they looked at India as a land of savages and heathens who still worship, pagan gods, and which we still,
Pagans, yeah.
right? So in that sense, they were never translated per se, or the popularity of that did not reach. So because of this, suddenly, around the colonial 1940s and 50s, when we were about to get independence, we try to shed off this image of being heathens in any way whatsoever. And the literature kind of started reflecting that, because it all became about realism, about our independence struggle, what stories are there from the villages. Magic started slowly depleting or withdrawing from the stories we told, because we realized that over the last 200 years, our stories, the real life stories, are not reaching the public space. And I don't know, somewhere, this is my theory, and obviously I wish we had a Carl Jung who did like a great thesis on this. But I just felt that over time, we lost that touch with the magic which we used to tell in our stories, which we still tell in our stories. And and that's why fantasy as a genre kind of became dormant. And it's not dead. I would like to believe that it is not dead. It just needs resurrection like Dracula. So
Yeah. Well, oddly, you go back to kind of what they call now called pagan Britain, and there was a lot of old magics then, which now is called Wiccan. And there again, that kind of stuff doesn't feature in fantasy. It's quite
yeah.
uncommon, even in modern fantasy. It's all kind of fantasy through a different lens, through, I don't know, well, Wheel of Time, of course,
Yeah.
he borrowed a lot from other places. He didn't borrow it from kind of Western cultures. He took it from Eastern and Asian cultures and the kind of the yin and yang and the male and female and all that kind of magic things. But Wiccan magic in even Britain, we don't really talk about those kind of things now in our fantasy. It's kind of fallen by the wayside in favor of other things.
Right. Yeah. Because
Mm,
it's interesting, because while you guys don't talk about it, in our case, we still worship it. Like what Robert Jordan speaks about in his books of Saidar and Sedin,
hmm
it's taken also from Hindu religion, which is called Shakti and Shaivism. They're also very similar sounding words. It's basically male energy and feminine energy, which unite to create a cosmic consciousness. That's the whole idea. We still worship that. So, in a very interesting sense, our magic, which we had in which our ancestors wrote about or spoke of, is something which we are very closely intimated with in a very religious sense. Maybe that could also be another reason that since magic pervades our faith till date, uh, maybe we don't foray towards so much into fantasy. But I think that is slowly changing, like with the reception Sons of Darkness has received. Because once I was introduced to our fantasy and read it, I saw so many titles saying, why are there no Indian fantasy novels? Or we are looking for some South Asian fantasy novels.
Yeah.
And this is a movement which started in Sri Lanka. I like the way, certain people have difficulty pronouncing Mahabharata. I'm looking at you. I
Me.
have, but this problem exists across. Like this is this great author from Sri Lanka who's
hmm
called Yudraj Bataravane. I'm not sure if I'm getting his name right. He's Ronnie, R.R. Reddy's very good friend.
Right.
He writes amazing fantasy novels based in Sri Lankan setting,
Mm.
And so you have these fantasy books which are coming from different places to show their side of things. Like Poppy War. Poppy War did that for Chinese mythology
Yeah.
and made it so famous across the world. And I'm hoping that Sons of Darkness has opened doors and now you have more fantasy authors coming in.
I think so. I think it's changing in the last, I want to say 15 years. We've had more fantasy that wasn't typically white Western settings. It's crept in more and more to the point where my current trilogy is literally, set in 13th century Persia. I
Yeah.
couldn't find anything in that era, in that part of the world before, ever. And I'm thinking, surely there must be something like you. I did some research and that there must be something. Nothing at all.
I
So,
know, right? It's just so bizarre, like because there's this tagline which we use, like I use first Grimdark author from India, and that sounds like a cool, catchy tagline to use.
mm,
But I know that there's a tragedy behind that line because it's 2023 when I was published by Head of Zeus.
mhm.
It's way too late for Grimdark to come in India. But we're just glad that the process has at least begun in that sense, because we have a lot of readers. And if I may add, and I'm sorry I'm making this answer a
No,
little
go
too
ahead.
long, but this is something which I discovered that even market plays a big role in this because now publishers publish a lot of books, especially in India. in every month they have like 10 or 12 titles which they're releasing rather than one or two titles. Like at least Bloomsbury India does it. So you know what? Sons of Darkness. So in India, you do paperbacks. We don't do hardbacks for any fiction novels unless it
Right.
becomes like a bestseller. Okay,
Okay.
so it's always paperback first, unlike the rest of the world. So India, Bloomsbury India, found it easier to import Dance of Shadow books, paperbacks from UK rather than printed in India. And again, that to me did not make sense, but that is the market truth that printing it here would have cost more than importing it and paying the duty and all those taxes on it. And this was
Wow.
just bizarre. I know it was ridiculous, and I just couldn't believe it because, yeah, so all the paperbacks which are being sold here in India, all the Dance of Shadows books, I did a book tour across 3 or 4 cities, they
Mhm.
all were imported from London. Yeah, so I guess market plays a big role here because chunky books is not something which India has gotten used to in
Mm.
fiction. Non-fiction, yes, but in fiction, they're still warming up to the whole idea, and it becomes difficult for publishers to take a shot on it. Uh, I remember when I first pitched one of the publishers as Westland, which was a big publisher in India. They loved the book.
Mhm.
Uh, they said that, but can you divide your first book into 2 or 3 parts? And I'm like, it's already a 4-part series, and the whole idea of epic fantasy will go away if I split it. It will be like,
Mm.
I don't know, castrating the book and taking away the elements of it. You can't do that. But yeah. So I guess market also plays a big role there.
It does. It dictates how long a series can be, how long a book can be, and if a series isn't doing well, they can sort of say, "Oh, can you wrap it up a bit faster on it?" Which has happened before.
Mm.
The first book in any series always sells better than the
Of
rest of the
course.
series because everyone, they try it out, and if they like it, great. If they don't,
Yeah.
half the people maybe only buy the second book and so on. So it's
Which sucks, right? Because you would know this as well that your second book tends to be, I mean, most of the times better than your first book because you have leveled up as a writer.
mm,
You have understood how things work, and your characters are now better placed. So you don't have to spend time introducing them again,
yeah.
and you can carry the journey. And I know Dance of Shadows is better than Sons of Darkness, at least for me, because when I look at Sons of Darkness, I'm like, okay, this is shit compared to what I've written now. But then I realized that marketing and promoting it's like a pyramid. Like first book will sell a lot, second book will
Yes.
sell lesser than that, third book will sell a lot lesser. So it becomes difficult because when I'm promoting Dance of Shadows everywhere, I know in the back of my head I have to tell them, "Acha, but you have to buy Sons of Darkness first and then come to Dance of Shadows." So it's interesting. It's a tricky thing, but yeah.
And it's the inverse of the indie market where longer series sell better and longer books sell better. So
Yeah.
it's such a strange
Um,
market that we're in. Traditional publishing is so bizarre.
I agree.
Um,
Even audiobooks, by the way, the bigger the books, the more they sell because
yes,
the return on your investment is a lot more because you're investing the same amount of price and getting a lot more pages.
yeah.
And that's not the same thing when it comes to books. So I'll become an economics professor by the end of my entire series, I think.
You will kind of learn about the splits of your sales and audio, ebook, and paperback and hardback and all that kind of stuff. You learn a lot more. I think having a business brain, having an organized, structured brain, as well as the creative brain, can only stand you in good stead in being a published author. I think it really helps because you understand why some decisions are made, alongside the creative kind of element that keeps you, coming back to the page.
Mhm.
But we met at Worldcon last year, obviously, and what was it like meeting some of these authors that you'd only read about? Obviously, Erickson wasn't there, but you got to meet George R. Martin. So what was that like?
Oh, it was, okay.
Calm, calm, calm.
Uh, I mean, George R. R. Martin was like a polar bear in the Arctic, like the way Matt is from Broken Binding. Like, you heard information that, okay, he has been cited here, he has been cited there. But, when you reach that place, he's no longer there. And of course, George R. R. Martin, I love him, but he could not fill apparently a form to Worldcon, and because of which, he was not part of the panels. At least that's what I heard. That's the
Yep,
grapevine.
yep.
So by the end of because I know he even visited the Broken Binding stand. Like I saw a picture
Hmm.
of the library of a Viking who was interviewing him. And he was there
Yes.
with the Broken Binding stand, and I was just like, damn it, I'm always there. The one time I'm not there, the one time I took an afternoon nap, he's gone. But I remember this was the Hugo Awards were about to start, and I was sitting with the author of Navola and
Paolo, Paolo Baggio Blue.
Paolo, and I was
Mm.
sitting with my agent, my publisher, and I was like really dressed to the nines because I thought, okay, this is the Oscars of fantasy. I need to like really get there, represent India. And then I get a message from a mutual friend of ours, Mayor,
Mm.
who, in her excitement, has texted me, "Come to Olasa Bar." Okay. Now I figure immediately by the way it's written in caps lock, this has to do with George R. R. Martin. I tell my publisher that I am leaving. And I'm asking everyone, what is Olasa Bar? And no one knows this. Okay. And then it just clicks me. She meant to write Plaza Bar, like the Crown Plaza Hotel, but in her
Hmm.
excitement, she has misspelled it. But then it's okay. I know it. So from the broken binding stand, I run all the way till Crown Plaza place. And while I'm running, my jacket is too much for me, so I am taking it out in Bollywood style. And I'm like, why did I not run? My abs or non-existent abs are hurting. I'm running out of breath, but I'm in my head, I am actually channeling Goku. And I don't know if you watch Dragon Ball Z, but I'm thinking that I'm leveling up as a Super Saiyan. And I'm constantly getting messages that Gaurav, he's done with the bar. Gaurav, he's exiting the hotel. Gaurav is about to enter his car. I'm like, fuck. So I ultimately, and luckily someone has recorded this video, and I'm so grateful to that guy. I come and I hold his shoulder. I'm like, just 1 second, just 1 second. And I've always had this thing that when I ultimately meet him, like even in my acknowledgements of Sons of Darkness, it said that I want to thank George R. R. Martin in bracket, who I have not met yet.
Hmm.
So I had a lot of things to say, and I thought I will tell him something profound that will impress him a lot. I
Yes.
told, I told him, "Sir, you're everything," and I'm just like, "It's not a romantic scene. You are not Meg Ryan. He's not Tom
Sir,
Hanks."
you're my heart. Wait, what did I say?
Like, this is ridiculous. And he starts laughing, and everyone around starts laughing. And luckily, Mare comes to my rescue. She says that he has written an amazing book, and it's called The Indian Game of Thrones. And luckily, they are doing the speaking part for me because I am just like so starstruck, and obviously like I'm panting because of the continuous running. But he was so nice, and towards like we had a brief conversation, and I didn't even have my book with me, which was ridiculous. But I had a tote bag which had the picture of Sons of Darkness. So I'm like, "Sir, this is the book." And he's just like, "You know what?" And he gave me a coin which said Valar Morghulis. And for me, that was my Arya Stark moment, and it was just amazing. I told him Valar Morghulis. He didn't say Valar Dohaeris, but it's okay.
Oh,
I
come
will
on,
take it.
George.
So
Do it. Come on, do the thing. Do the thing. Ah.
But it was amazing. Like he got in the car and I treated everyone. And I think I said, okay, I'm going to buy everyone shots because I was really happy. And I held my vodka glass and my hand started shaking because I realized that this man has actually changed my destiny. I was a lawyer working in a law firm, and, reading his books kind of totally changed. It was a curveball that life threw, and it was really amazing meeting him. But luckily, I also I mean, you have met all of these authors before in a casual sense. For me, I walked into a bar because Adrian invited me, that come, we're going to a bar. I'm like, okay, sure, it's a whiskey bar. And I'm just like hanging around and I see someone sitting there and I just like took a double take and I'm like, "Adrian, is that Joe Abercrombie?" Like, yeah. Okay, and then I have to play it cool. Yeah, exactly. And I remember there is no mirror there, and I'm just like trying to set my hair as if that matters to him. And then I go and play it very cool with Joe Abercrombie, like, "Hi, Joe, this is I'm Gaurav. Could I speak to you for a moment?" And it was just amazing. He was so cool. He took us out for dinner, and I'm again playing it very cool, but inside I am freaking and shrieking. So it was pretty amazing to meet my heroes. Yeah.
Yeah, they say you shouldn't ever meet your heroes, but yeah, if you have that moment where you can meet your hero, your ultimate hero, absolutely. I think it's worth it. I did it years and years ago. I met my um literary hero, David Gemmell. I met
Oh.
him and he was a giant of a man. He was fantastic. And like you, I came away afterwards and I'm getting a coffee and the woman's like, "You all right?" I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, look at your hand." I'm like, "Oh," the adrenaline is worn off, and I was just trying to be cool, trying to be cool.
That's the most difficult part, right? That's insane. Like,
Yeah,
no, but it was
just
amazing. I met all these heroes. I agree with the quote, but everyone I met at Worldcon was just extremely kind. Now they might be serial killers on the inside, but they were just
probably, yeah.
such kind and generous people. Anna Smith Park, she was so kind and she was so sweet. And we had a conversation, and now we share an agent, and that is just amazing. Like, I connected her with my agent, and I'm like, wait, I am helping out the Queen of Grimdark in some way. That is just like to that. I was so happy, and it was amazing. So good times.
Yeah, Anna's lovely. She's really,
Yeah.
really nice. So let's talk about the books in the series, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and say it again.
Mm. Yes, let's do this.
And fair.
Second time's
Okay,
the charm.
I doubt it. So tell me and everybody else
Mm.
what the Mahabharata is.
Okay, so it is pronounced as Maha, M-A,
Yeah.
and Bharata. India's other name is called Bharat. Like that's the Sanskrit name of India. India has
Mm.
two names, and Maha means great. So it's called the Great Indian Story. That's the best way I can picture. Now, Mahabharata is this ancient text of war between two cousins. That's the shortest summary of the longest epic poem in the world. It's 16 times the size of the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. So you can only imagine every
1.8
character.
million words long. I looked this up.
Exactly.
1.8 million words.
I mean, Robert
Wow.
Jordan has got nothing on Mahabharata in
He's got
terms
to
of.
do more than 14 books to get near close to this. I mean, come on.
Yeah, exactly. And Mahabharata, the beauty of it is that the Mahabharata differs slightly from each part of India, or rather even Southeast Asia, because it's like this common heritage that we all share.
Mm.
And but the story is slightly different from place to place. And even then, the spine of it remains the same. And it's just this beautiful book that we have all grown up with, all our grandmothers. It's like a part of our culture. 9 out of 10 kids will tell you that their grandmom or grandparents told them the story of Mahabharata, as they were growing up. So, because it's a folk tale, it's a religious tale, it's all in one. It's also a very violent tale because it's a story which discusses war.
Mm.
But within it is, how the Muslims have Quran and the Christians have Bible. We
Yep.
have something which is called Gita, which is our holy book. That holy book is contained in Mahabharata. So our holy book is contained in the most violent book of our lore. So, and I love that whole dichotomy that exists, that irony which is here. But that is what Mahabharata is. What Sons of Darkness does is it takes a tale from there and reimagines it rather in a grimdark universe with
Mhm.
some of my own characters and some characters from the lore and just recreating something because Mahabharata again, since it was written in that time, like the way Homer's stories flow, it's more like a list of events.
Right.
But I try and write it from the perspective of the evil character, so as to speak, and do a bit of world building there because, as I said, I was very inspired by A Song of Ice and Fire. So I wanted to create an Indian Westeros of sorts. So, like, that's the attempt, at least, in the darkness.
So you only taken a small part of this, given that it is so long. You're just doing
Oh, yeah.
one part of the story, one character that you want to explore, and then you've built. So you've mixed the stories from this and with your own characters together.
Yeah, so it's like my story because since Mahabharata is so huge with so many characters, there is a lot of vacuum between characters and some stories which there is no branch that follows that path, and it's just left to your imagination. So I
Right.
step in there, and while the main Mahabharata plot runs parallel, my own story is going on together. So like they both are like parallel to each other, and ultimately it becomes more of my story. As I said, in India, mythology is a big genre, like mythofiction, it's called. It's not fantasy per se. It's more like just retellings from different perspective. So I wanted to combine these genres to appeal to the Indian audience as well at that point of time, at least. And plus, Mahabharata was something which really, really excited me. It's our Troy, so as to speak. And while we don't have a Brad Pitt-based movie on it,
Yet.
we can have
Yet.
yet. But let's see. I mean, I was really hoping Christopher Nolan makes a movie on us. But yeah, it's a little tricky, but because we still worship it, so I know it's tricky to deal with subjects, which can be sensitive issues. So someday.
So given that it is, as you said, it's still such an important text, were you apprehensive of how your books will be perceived in India by potential readers?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, at one point of time, my I was using a pseudonym because I didn't want to get stoned by people while I'm just walking the roads, and that was a legitimate fear that I had, and at least my father had. But then I thought, no, I'll stick with my name. But luckily, what I figured out that trolls cannot read such long texts. So far, no, there is no scribbled summary of my book yet somewhere, so they're okay. They think that this is fine. It looks okay. I know they won't have the patience to read through the entire thing. So for some time, the chunkiness of my book is my greatest shield.
Plus, it also works as a very good weapon because it is so heavy.
Exactly.
So you can stop bullets and you can fight off
Yeah,
potential
definitely.
enemies with it. Hmm.
That's the
Hmm.
plan.
So because it's written in English, the majority of the audience or the Western speaking audience will have no clue about any of this kind of stuff. So it's
Yeah.
basically going to feel like a brand new fantasy world to them.
Yeah.
So were you trying to find the balance between how much information to introduce, but also keep the story moving, and how much detail you put in, but also keep the story moving and set the pace. I mean, was that a challenge for you when you were writing it?
Yeah, definitely. Because as authors and writers, our ambition can sometimes get ahead of us, and we want to just show the world which we have in our minds.
Yeah.
And while that might look beautiful to us and on paper, but from the ultimate goal, which is to give the reader a good time, you need to like hold yourself back. Make sure that you spread it out across books. So that was obviously a thing in my mind. But my perspective, again, I had no idea that I will ever reach out to foreign readers. Like that was, I mean, I wasn't even thinking that far. All my goal at that point of time was to write the book which I had in my mind
Yeah.
and to introduce fantasy as a genre to Indians. So when I was doing world building, I was just like, okay, you guys got to see what world building is, because you don't have books where world building is done to such an extent, and it'll be very cool for you guys. It'll be awesome. But then somehow the book, because of word of mouth, because I was indie published before, and then luckily word of mouth traveled, and because of Matt, the Broken Binding, and my agent, ultimately I got ahead of Zero Steel. But yeah, I'm just like grateful. But again, that was definitely a North Star in my head. That I need to hold back the information, because otherwise I'll just end up putting too much. I do end up putting a lot of information, by the way. But then I learn it's a learning curve, like how to scale it back.
Mm. I find the editing process difficult sometimes because it's how much I want to share. And it can like it's just slowing the pace down. You're like, yeah, but this is so cool stuff. And they're like, yeah, but it's. I mean, your books are quite chunky. They're quite big. So you'd written the first one, and obviously then you have to go through the editing process. How did you find that? Having someone else come in and go, can we change this? Can we move this around? Can we do this? What was it like having a professional editor look at it for the first time?
So it's been interesting with both Sons of Darkness and Dance of Shadows. Now it's a very tricky situation, and I remember I spoke with Oliver, who's my agent. So when the editors come in, they just point out like maybe there are certain errors here, and maybe there's a consistency issue, or maybe I've
Mhm.
made some mistakes, or something is too violent, or something on those lines. No one has ever told me to move things so far. Okay, and I start freaking out. I'm like, okay, have that, because I've heard stories about how editors will come in, and of course that's their job, because they will read the book and figure out what can be moved about and what can be streamlined, etc., etc. But no one tells me that, so I'm like, I hope they have read the book well and they have had a good time with it, because I am like left in the blind. Is the book really okay? Because I've seen some colleagues, the editors send them back to rewrite certain sections.
Yeah.
But mostly the edits that have come to me have been like, okay, can you shorten the book wherever you want? That's it. That is generally the kind of edits that I have gotten. Um, Again, with Sons of Darkness, the experience was different, because I initially had an Indian editor when it was indie published.
Mhm.
And the only trouble which they had was one of my characters, who's Eklavya, he speaks in third person. Like
Ah.
Dwayne the Rock Johnson, I suppose. Okay. So they were like, okay, is this going to work? And they changed it completely. They made it I everywhere.
Ah.
And I said no. I went back and again put it back. And that was it took me a lot of time to do that. But I again made it third person again. And I love the fact that it worked like a charm, because that's something which I've seen on Goodread reviews when I used to stalk it. They love the way Kalinga talks. And I'm glad that I stayed true to my conviction. But in book two as well, I've had like great edits. Like there was this pregnancy which I was dealing with. And silly me, because my knowledge of pregnancy has come from TV serials. Okay. So some of the symptoms of eighth and ninth month I have written in the first 2 months, and first 2 months symptoms I've written in the last 2 months. And my editor is a woman, and she's like, "This is not how it works." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, sorry." Then I had to Google, and I've done like a thesis on how maternity cycle works, and I'm glad I learned a lot. And yeah, it was fun. I think that's the one of the most amazing things about writing, that you end up gaining so much knowledge on parallel items, which might not be your main foray, and that is amazing. So.
Yeah, until you go through a thing or experience it, you'll never know it as well as someone who's done it many times, I guess.
Yeah,
Like
I
I've
know. I
written
mean, when I told,
so go
sorry,
ahead.
when I told my mom about this whole pregnancy issue, she's like, "I'm ashamed of you. How did you not know this?" And I'm just like, "Mom, you didn't tell me this, no? How would
Like,
I
why
know?"
didn't you come to me? Why, I mean,
Yeah,
like I
yeah,
didn't carry you for nine
I know.
months. You didn't come and ask me about this.
Yeah, I know, but that led to multiple stories. She's like, you troubled me so much when you were inside me. You basically, I was puking all the time, and you were such a troublesome kid. And I was just like, okay, now this is becoming my resume as a baby, as a fetus. So great. That wasn't a fun part, but it was
Good
okay.
background information for next time. Yeah, okay. You have a pregnant mother character who's puking. Great, we know this happens and stuff. Food cravings, yeah, all of that. Okay, yeah, we can do that. We can do that. So, tell us about the story of Sons of Darkness. Tell us, is this going to be a trilogy? By the way, first of
It's
all,
going to be quartered, like 4 books in the
okay,
series. Sons of Darkness. There are multiple three major storylines that intersect. One
okay,
is a pirate princess who has been spurned by her lover. He's a righteous prince. This pirate princess is like Dorian Gray, who has no conscience filter and is just an agent of chaos.
right.
She ends up sleeping with her to-be husband's best friend and ends up killing another ally of this prince who she loves, and she still expects that guy to be loyal to her and end up marrying her, and obviously things don't work out that way, and the chaos that unveils. Then there's this other this Krishna, who's basically this diplomat character. I love. He's like Tyrion Lannister and Littlefinger combined,
Nice.
and he has a swordswoman of a wife who's on the cover of the book.
Hmm.
They are part of a republic now. That republic is facing off against an empire, not in a very Jedi sense, but in the sense the empire wants to they have legitimate reasons to crush the republic down. And this Tyrion Lannister character only has his brains to get out of the situation, and I love that. That's like all my Locke Lamora love coming into the picture and figuring out how to get out of it. And third is an assassin's apprentice who's using yoga to learn how to become an assassin and awaken her chakras so that she can ultimately get vengeance on people who burned her family alive. So this is the plot, more or less. It's very superficial
Hmm.
description, but yeah, that's the crux because there are multiple POV characters. I always wondered how George R. R. Martin would answer when they ask him how to describe the plot of A Song of Ice and Fire in one go.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's basically what Sons of Darkness is. It's a lot of history mixed as well. For example, I just spoke about how Krishna is part of a republic.
Hmm.
Now, archaeological evidence suggests that one of the first examples of democracy is not Athens. It was actually Mathura, which is a kingdom in India that was formed as a republic of people rather than a kingdom situation, which was generally the norm everywhere. And that's the first evidence of a republic. So I loved getting these because why I can keep rambling on. But one of my favorite novels now is Stephen King's Salem's Lot.
Yes.
And one thing which he has done and which he's spoken about that Salem's Lot, the city itself is a character. Like
Yeah.
he infused it with such details, such vibrant details that it was a character in itself. And that is something which I've tried to do with all the different forms of countries that we have in this entire geopolitical setup. It's like an Indian World War meets Brad Pitt's Troy. So that's the idea of Sons of Darkness. And yeah, and so Dance of Shadows basically carries it forward, and we discover the tree. Again, let me use references. It's like Avatar, James Cameron's Avatar meets
Hmm.
Ocean's 11, meets Gladiator, and meets Journey to 50,000, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I think that's
Hmm.
the best way I can describe it. So it has like heists, you have a librarian princess, you have ancient Indian witches who are so different from the witches around the world. Because witches, if you look at the description, they're all vegan hippies.
Yep.
Um, but our witches used to basically have sex with each other, not allow the man to basically finish. And they used to have sex on top of a corpse whose head had to be decapitated in one single stroke. And they used to do it in temples. Like Indian temples are mostly conical in shape, if you've ever seen pictures, but
Hmm.
their temples are roofless temples because apparently they gained the power to fly after doing this entire sex ritual. Wow. I mean, that was amazing. When I read this is actual history. And I thought this is so cool. So I tried to, give it a fantasy touch and I've introduced that in my book. So yeah, that's the idea.
There's nothing so disturbing as history. Every time I did some research into something, I'd be like, if I put that in the book, no one will believe me. Like, that's not real. You've made that
Exactly.
up. I'm like, it's real. Go and look it up yourself.
But I love this line which you just said that you won't believe what really happens in truth because one of the editorial notes that I'd gotten for a particular scene,
Mm.
it's basically two elephants who go completely berserk and assault rhinos, like 53 rhinos in one go. And
Hmm.
the idea was that these two elephants had all the mother because elephants have a matriarchal society.
Yes.
And all the head mothers, they had been poached, and these turned the two elephants berserk. And they had assaulted, like sexually assaulted these rhinos, by the way. Okay. And my editor is like, I don't think this is possible. I sent her 5 news articles the same. Like BBC has done a full coverage on this because this actually happened in Africa, where two elephants went berserk and assaulted 53 rhinos. And I'm like, yeah, truth is always stranger than fiction.
Always,
Yeah.
always. Like I did some research into Zoroastrianism for my last series, and I came across the Towers of Silence. And then I started, and that was a 5 hour journey into finding out they build these towers for the dead, and they leave them the roof open, and they put the bodies on top with no clothes to be fed to the birds, and that's how they
Vultures,
do it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, we can't do that anymore. And they're not allowed to do it anymore in certain countries. They used to still do it for the dead, but you can't. And like, that sounds a bit far-fetched. The Tower of Silence. You've made that name up. I'm like, nope. Here's a
Yeah.
file. Here's a reference. Here's where it came from. It's been around for hundreds of years. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what I just feel that if history were to be given a genre, it would be grimdark.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
always full of war and conflict and there's not the quiet periods. They don't seem to last
Mm.
very long. But so tell me about the themes for this book. Did you develop them before when you were in the middle of it, or afterwards during the editing process? Did you realize what the themes were for Sons of Darkness and perhaps for the whole series?
I think with Sons of Darkness, again, one of the greatest things which I love about books, which I like to read, is gray shades of morality. So that was definitely the theme because, again, India has one of our greatest icons is Gandhi. We have a very Gandhian sense of philosophy.
Hmm.
Um, Very neat lines put in black and white. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be completely different. Wanted to be anti-Tolkien in nature. That's the theme of the book, and that was always the North Star while crafting these characters, to give them both redeemable and irredeemable qualities, because that's how we all are as humans.
Yeah.
So that was definitely the case. But one thing which I really loved about the books I read was when characters got out of situations by insane planning, like political. There's a game called Twilight Struggle, a board game where you're basically Soviet Union on one side and USA on one side, and
Right.
you're just using like strategy to get around and figure out how to win. I love that because you have to plan like 7 steps ahead, and that's something which I loved about Game of Thrones as well. Like I love. Now I can talk about it. For the longest time, the password for my email IDs was Tywin Lannister. Okay, because that man, okay. And so the way he thinks, that's something which I wanted to bring about in the fantasy which I have. Like, yes, there's a world building done, there's an Indian element, not Indian, there's completely everything Indian about it.
Mm.
But one of the main things was when you finish the book, you're like, I love the mind games that were here, the seeds that were planted, which ultimately germinated into trees of war. So that was something which was also the theme. And third, and most importantly, were badass women characters. Mythological retellings in India, and this is something which I can say for a certainty, have always portrayed women as damsels in distress who
Mhm.
are overcoming a patriarchal narrative and ultimately emerging out on top. Like,
Right.
women fighting the whole situation. That is great, and I loved reading those. But I did not want that. I wanted a grimdark Galadriel, you know? So I wanted women who are damsels who cause distress. I know this is like a line which I came up with, and I've been always using this as a marketing tagline. But
Mhm.
this is something which I really wanted, anti-heroine. So that's why both the books, like the first book has Satyabhama, who's a swordswoman, but she's the third wife of this Tyrion Lannister character, and how she deals with it. And she has this band of women soldiers, and that's about it. And second book, Dance of Shadows, that has the pirate princess on it, who is this agent of chaos we spoke about, the Dorian Gray character. And I've always loved bringing out these women characters because this is something which I felt is lacking from the Indian fantasy or science fiction scene, like badass anti-heroine women. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, bringing the first to many different things.
Yeah.
Was there any character that was easier to write than the others? I don't want to say which is your favorite because that's kind of Sophie's choice, but was there
Yeah.
anyone that once you started getting into the book you thought this one feels easier to write than the others? And that's sometimes can be quite worrying if the character's not quite a dark character.
I know. Unfortunately, I have answered this question before, and my friends who saw this realized I knew it. You're exactly like this character. Because I think for me, the easier characters to write were who I decided to infuse some of my personality into, so that the responses to situation is something which I would do.
Right.
So there was this one character who Anyway, I won't go into the details because I've learned from my mistake. But he's a bit of a mischievous character, and he like
Mhm.
fools around, and he gets himself into trouble a lot of times. And whatever his responses are, I had a blast writing him because I felt I'm writing my autobiography, and it was so much fun. And I'm glad that that like also resonated with the readers. But so that was Krishna and Dantavakra. I really enjoyed writing them.
Mm.
Conversely, even like most difficult characters, which I also enjoyed writing, by the way, were people who were completely my opposite. Like the
Yes.
library princess character, who's an introvert, who's shy, doesn't want to really go outside her palace, but is forced to go on a quest. Now, that is completely diametrically opposite to what I would be. But writing her was just so much fun because I felt like I'm living a parallel life. This is dark matter and this is an alternate universe. And I think that's as a writer personally, and I think I can speak for all writers, that is a very enriching feeling when you get into the mind of someone who's not you in any way, but you're still able to figure out what the responses to situations you put in front of them is.
Yes, yes. The only thing is if your parents read the books and say, "Oh, it's very dark," or in my mother's case, there's an awful lot of killing in the books. I'm like, well, most of the books have a war in, Mum, so it's probably gonna happen. But
Yeah. My dad is always like, oh, I can't read a book. You just, any character I like, you end up killing them. This is rubbish. What is this kind of book? I don't like it. Oh. And then my dad came up with the conclusion. He's like, no, you know what? I'm happy. I'm glad you're putting all the violent thoughts in your head in your book rather than in your actions. So he's genuinely concerned I might be the next Indian Ted Bundy. So he's like, better the Indian George R. R. Martin rather than Indian Ted Bundy. So I'm like,
yeah,
okay.
you're writing it down so you don't go out and act it in the real world. It's you get revenge on the page for people who wronged you in real life, and they don't know.
Yeah.
It's much safer and much healthier. It's
Yeah.
therapy, really. I think. I
I
think.
agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I started writing as a form of self-therapy because I mean, I did not think this was therapy then, but in my law firm, we had like really long hours and I used to come back and write for like 15, 20 minutes and I could be like Thanos and, torture all my characters. And I felt maybe that was the way of dealing with my boss. I do not know. Like I couldn't torture him, so I was torturing his likeness in the character in the books. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So are you writing full time now?
Now I still practice, but now law has become my secondary career rather than my primary career because I moved out of a law firm. I practice individually now.
Okay.
So that's something which I do. I also do stand-up comedy on the side. So I have some these gigs and that's a lot of fun. But yeah, and I teach a little bit law. So it's like
So
a
what
mixture.
what is your work-life balance then like? If you've got all these different things
Oh,
going.
I think it's non-existent, I think each day there's something which is like really heavy. Like there'll be one day which is very writing heavy. But if I have some gigs, that day will be obviously very comedy heavy. Those days when I have cases, and I have to prepare for those hearings, again, it's that heavy. So there is no balance really, and I've given up trying to find it. It's all about just juggling and hoping the ball does not land on your face. And yeah, more often than not it does, but it's okay. We'll deal with it.
You're still young. You've got the energy. It's fine. It's fine.
That's so, yeah.
Stand-up comedy, that must be terrifying. The idea of, for me, of trying to stand in a room and make someone laugh terrifies me way more than writing a book.
Oh
How did you get
yeah.
into that?
It was just, I love bucket lists. Okay, and this was like
Right.
one bucket list that I've always had. And during the pandemic, when you realize that life was short,
Yep.
I just decided to go to an open mic contest and I ended up winning it somehow magically.
Oh, fantastic.
And I was like, okay, maybe this can work because ultimately stand-up comedy is also writing at its core. I mean, of course, it's about stage presence and getting the beats right, but
Hmm.
I really enjoy that process. And I realize that that's also complementing my writing somehow. It's keeping that humor thing fresh
Right.
because in grimdark books, or at least like I love Joe Abercrombie books.
Mhm.
And what I love about that is the alternate of humor and violence. Like he kills someone, he gives you grief, and then he makes you laugh. So I wanted to do that with my book as well. And I think that kind of helps. But I think it's still terrifying because every time I go up on stage, I know I get the jitters. But let's say if I'm going to speak, like if I'm doing a TED talk or if I'm speaking in a college about my books or having a conversation about history, I'm a
Mm.
big history enthusiast and I speak about that a lot on stages. That's okay. That's absolutely chill. I can teach a law class, but when I have to do stand-up comedy, I am freaking out like an amateur, even though I've been doing it for 3 years. So I think, yeah, I completely relate because what happens in stand-up comedy is it's not that the more experience you get that will help you suddenly deal with it because it every day you're trying out new content like every
Right.
time you go up on stage the audience might be completely different
Mhm.
so it's not that the previous audience experience gives you some foray with this so Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes when I see like when my joke goes over someone's head and you don't get that laugh, you're like, okay, move on. It's fine. Just like move on to the next one. So it's a learning thing.
Well, I guess it forces you to live in the moment and learn what works and
It
what
makes you better
doesn't.
at dealing with DNFs. When you reach out to
Yeah,
do DNF, I'm like, okay, you know what? I have dealt with worse on stage, so it's okay.
this is true. Yes, you've lived a life, you've had some experience, and a DNF
Mm.
is it's fine. It's fine. As I always said to my old boss who bought some of my books, she said, "I bought them, but I haven't read them." And I said, "I don't get paid extra if you read them, so it's okay.
Yeah,
It's I don't mind." She's
absolutely.
like,
I
"Oh,
agree.
okay then." So how far are you into book three then of four? How far are you getting on with it?
Um, I've taken a bit of a break, like a palate cleanser. I'm writing a short novel on something else, which
Nice.
is completely different from this style, so that it keeps my mind supple.
Hmm.
And now that I'm writing that book, I'm constantly getting ideas for the third book. So I think I needed this, because I was working on Dance of Shadows continuously over the months because I
Right.
did miss my deadline, and I had to make up for it. And so there were like a lot of long hours that went into writing.
Mm.
And personally, for me, creativity is a process that needs a little bit of breathing room.
Right.
So I thought that if I immediately jump into book three, uh, it won't be as much fun. It will start feeling like a chore. And that's something which I've always been afraid of because writing was always an escape for me. And now that
Yes.
it's my primary thing, I don't want to have that automatic revulsion which people can have with their main jobs, which they have to do every day. So I think this palette cleanser kind of really, really helps. And I love the fact that like even whenever I do get these, okay, I hope I'm doing a good job. He's writing something which is long term, blah, blah, blah. Um, Around that point of time, I think this was one situation which was happening. And I'm sorry, I've completely diverged into something else, by the way. But then I got a picture from Broken Binding. The Matt sent me
Hmm.
this picture of Dance of Shadows. Now, on the cover, I have been very heavily involved, like with Michaela, like extremely. Like I, I was the Patrick in case of my cover designer. I think that's called AD, right? So I was definitely that. So with Sons of Darkness, but this beautiful design which they have on
Mm.
the Broken Binding cover here. So that's something which I did not know of. Like it just happened, and I got the email, and I was like, "This looks fantastic." Okay. But for Dance of Shadows, I did request them that maybe can they put this one design on Dance of Shadows. And I got no response. So I had no idea what was happening because I had routed this not to Matt directly, but I had routed it through Head of View. So I have no idea whether this worked or not. And then
Mm.
suddenly I get this picture and it's this. So this is basically the Hindu god of dance. But I think I have it here. One second.
Hmm.
Yeah. So this is the Natraj. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, yeah.
This is he's called the Hindu god of dance, and this is the same guy here.
Mm.
Right? And I was so
Fantastic.
grateful for them because to pull this in. And and I remember that day I told my friends as well that I was having this idea that as you said, like second books work a lot lesser than first book and third book works a lot less. But the fact that Broken Binding put this on was suddenly like this validation which you got. So and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna stick with this for a little bit longer. So let's see how this goes. But yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, you've got two books out, as we said, Sons of
Yeah.
Darkness and Dance of Shadows there. Look at that. Fantastic. Fantastic books. Broken Binding, special edition hardbacks are out and available now. And I'll put links down below. So we'll look forward to seeing book three and then obviously book four. And you've got to, that's going to be the challenge. You've got to wrap it all up. You've got to tie all the loose ends together. You've got to yeah, bring it full
Yeah.
circle. Are you
I think once you
excited?
start writing this, you start sympathizing with George R. R. Martin a lot. Like, you know what? I understand why you're taking so much time because it makes sense. Just like totally understandable.
Yeah.
So,
But you'll
he,
get there. You'll get there. You've done, you're two in. You're thinking about three. You're kind of you're more than halfway really because you've
yeah,
planned a
absolutely.
lot of three.
That's the plan.
Well, thank you for coming on and spending some time with us.
Thank you so
And
much, Nathan.
hopefully I'll see you again soon at an event in future.
Absolutely looking forward to it. Thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Goodbye, everyone. We'll see you later. Bye.